Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a cold evening in Texas, the rain falling steadily on the windshield of Mark Davis's car as he drove down the slick streets of a small college town. At 23, Mark felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. Law school, part-time jobs, and debts left by his late father had him drowning. As he turned the corner, his phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. He answered the call with a weary sigh, expecting another student loan update or a bill reminder. But instead, a calm, authoritative voice greeted him. "Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I would like to meet with you. It's regarding your financial situation." Mark frowned, confused. "I'm sorry, who is this?" "How do you know about I know enough?" she interrupted smoothly. "Let's meet at Brooks Bistro. 7 o'clock. It's important." The call ended before he could protest, leaving Mark more bewildered than before. He arrived at the bistro, a cozy but upscale restaurant, feeling the weight of the rain-soaked clothes clinging to him. Stepping inside, he was greeted by the warm, inviting scent of freshly brewed coffee. Eleanor Brooks was already there, sitting at a corner table, a striking woman with silver hair, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. The moment she looked up at him, Mark felt out of place. He hadn't expected someone like her to notice a guy like him. "Mark," she greeted with a subtle nod, motioning for him to sit. She didn't smile, but there was an air of authority about her. He hesitated before sitting down, unsure of what to expect. "I know you're struggling," she said, her voice steady, "and I think I have a solution for you." Mark stared at her, not sure whether to laugh or be offended. "What do you mean?" he asked, leaning forward. She met his gaze, unwavering. "I know about the debts your father left behind. You're barely scraping by, and I can help. All you have to do is marry me." Mark blinked in shock. "Excuse me? Marry you? What are you talking about?" Eleanor's eyes never wavered as she leaned back in her chair. "It's simple. A business arrangement. I'll take care of all your debts. You'll marry me, and in return, you'll ensure my legacy. No love involved, just a contract." Mark was stunned, his mind racing. This was insane, wasn't it? Marrying a woman he didn't know for money? But the weight of his situation pressed down on him. His mother's medical bills, his sister's tuition fees, his own mounting debts. Was this the only way out? He could feel his pride fighting against his desperation, but Eleanor's calm, assured presence left him speechless. She was offering him an out, a way to save his family, but at what cost? He didn't answer immediately, the silence hanging thick between them. Eleanor didn't rush him, her gaze steady, waiting for his decision. The seconds ticked by, and Mark could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Was this really happening? Was he really considering this? Finally, he let out a breath and looked down at his hands, fidgeting with the edge of the napkin. "I'll do it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll marry you." Eleanor smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was businesslike, calculated. "Good," she said. "We'll make the arrangements immediately. Don't take too long to think about it, Mark. This offer won't last forever." And just like that, Mark's life was about to change. He couldn't quite grasp the enormity of what he had just agreed to, but one thing was certain: was about to marry a woman he didn't know, for reasons he couldn't quite understand, in a deal that would tie his fate to hers in ways he could never predict. Stay tuned for the next part of this unexpected journey. What will happen when Mark and Eleanor begin their new lives together? Will their contract remain business as usual, or will something more complex, more dangerous, begin to unfold? Don't miss it. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a cold evening in Texas, the rain steadily falling on the windshield of Mark Davis's car as he drove down the slick streets of his small college town. At 23, Mark felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. Between law school, part-time jobs, and mounting debts left by his late father, he was drowning. As he turned the corner, his phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. He answered the call, expecting another update on student loans or a bill reminder. But instead, a calm, authoritative voice greeted him. "Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I'd like to meet with you. It's regarding your financial situation." Mark frowned. "I'm sorry, who is this?" "How do you know about I know enough?" she interrupted smoothly. "Let's meet at Brooks Bistro. 7 o'clock. It's important." The call ended before he could protest, leaving Mark more confused than before. He arrived at the bistro, a cozy but upscale restaurant, feeling the weight of the rain-soaked clothes clinging to him. Stepping inside, he was greeted by the warm, inviting scent of freshly brewed coffee. Eleanor Brooks was already there, sitting at a corner table, a striking woman with silver hair, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. The moment she looked up at him, Mark felt out of place. He hadn't expected someone like her to notice a guy like him. "Mark," she greeted with a subtle nod, motioning for him to sit. She didn't smile, but there was an air of authority about her. He hesitated before sitting down, unsure of what to expect. "I know you're struggling," she said, her voice steady, "and I think I have a solution for you." Mark stared at her, not sure whether to laugh or be offended. "What do you mean?" he asked, leaning forward. She met his gaze, unwavering. "I know about the debts your father left behind. You're barely scraping by, and I can help. All you have to do is marry me." Mark blinked in shock. "Excuse me? Marry you? What are you talking about?" Eleanor's eyes never wavered as she leaned back in her chair. "It's simple. A business arrangement. I'll take care of all your debts. You'll marry me, and in return, you'll ensure my legacy. No love involved, just a contract." Mark was stunned, his mind racing. This was insane, wasn't it? Marrying a woman he didn't know for money? But the weight of his situation pressed down on him. His mother's medical bills, his sister's tuition fees, his own mounting debts. Was this the only way out? He could feel his pride fighting against his desperation, but Eleanor's calm, assured presence left him speechless. She was offering him an out, a way to save his family, but at what cost? He didn't answer immediately, the silence hanging thick between them. Eleanor didn't rush him, her gaze steady, waiting for his decision. The seconds ticked by, and Mark could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Was this really happening? Was he really considering this? Finally, he let out a breath and looked down at his hands, fidgeting with the edge of the napkin. "I'll do it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll marry you." Eleanor smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was businesslike, calculated. "Good," she said. "We'll make the arrangements immediately. Don't take too long to think about it, Mark. This offer won't last forever." And just like that, Mark's life was about to change. He couldn't quite grasp the enormity of what he had just agreed to, but one thing was certain: was about to marry a woman he didn't know, for reasons he couldn't quite understand, in a deal that would tie his fate to hers in ways he could never predict. Stay tuned for the next part of this unexpected journey. What will happen when Mark and Eleanor begin their new lives together? Will their contract remain business as usual, or will something more complex, more dangerous, begin to unfold? Don't miss it. The following day, Mark sat in his small, cramped apartment, staring at the contract in his hands. It felt surreal. He had agreed to marry a woman he had just met, a woman who was offering him an escape from the overwhelming weight of his financial troubles. His phone buzzed on the table, snapping him back to reality. It was a message from Eleanor. "Meet me at my office at 2 p.m. We need to finalize everything." Mark took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had made his decision, but was he really ready for this? Could he really go through with marrying a stranger just to save his family? He didn't have much time to think about it. He grabbed his jacket and left the apartment. The city outside was bustling, but to Mark, it felt like the world had slowed down. He barely registered the people walking by as he made his way to the office building. The towering structure stood before him, a symbol of the wealth and power that Eleanor Brooks commanded. Mark walked through the glass doors, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the quiet lobby. A receptionist greeted him with a polite smile and directed him to the elevator. As the doors closed, he felt a knot form in his stomach. What was he doing? What had he gotten himself into? When Mark arrived at Eleanor's office, she was already there, sitting behind a large, polished desk, her posture impeccable. The room was sleek, modern, and had an air of authority about it. Mark couldn't help but feel out of place as he stepped inside. Eleanor stood up, offering him a firm handshake. "I'm glad you could make it, Mark," she said, her voice cool and businesslike. "We need to go over the details." Mark nodded, trying to steady his nerves as he took a seat across from her. The contract lay between them, a symbol of the agreement they had made the night before. Eleanor slid a pen toward him. "All you need to do is sign here," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Once this is done, I'll take care of everything. Your debts, your family's future, everything." Mark hesitated for a moment, his fingers brushing over the pen. It was easy to see that Eleanor was used to getting what she wanted, and she wasn't offering him a choice. But in his heart, Mark knew he had no other option. He picked up the pen and signed the document, his hand shaking slightly. Once the papers were signed, Eleanor smiled. "Good," she said. "You'll move in with me tomorrow. There are a few public appearances we'll need to make, and we'll start working on the logistics of our arrangement." Mark's stomach churned at the word arrangement. This was supposed to be a marriage, not a business deal. But he had made his choice. He could already feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. As Mark left the office building, his thoughts were a whirlwind. He had just signed his life away. But as much as he tried to deny it, a part of him was curious about Eleanor. She was everything he wasn't: confident, composed, and in control. It was hard not to be drawn to her, even if this entire situation felt wrong. He thought about the life she had offered him, the security it could provide for his family, but he also knew that something deeper was starting to stir inside him: unease, a sense that this arrangement was going to be far more complicated than he had imagined. Later that night, as Mark sat in his car, parked outside his apartment building, he stared out at the city lights. He hadn't told anyone about his decision yet, not his mother, not his sister. He couldn't bring himself to explain it. He knew they would never understand. But as he thought about his family's future, he knew he couldn't back out now. The next morning, Mark stood at the threshold of Eleanor's luxurious penthouse apartment. He had packed a small bag, the last remnants of his old life, and was about to step into a world that felt foreign and intimidating. The door opened, and Eleanor greeted him with a brief smile. "Welcome to your new life," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Mark nodded and stepped inside, the sleek, modern interior feeling more like a showroom than a home. Over the next few days, Mark's new life unfolded before him. Eleanor kept him busy with meetings, appearances, and various arrangements for their marriage. She was always calm, always composed, and always in control. Mark did his best to follow her lead, but there was an underlying tension between them. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being used, just a pawn in Eleanor's grand scheme. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Mark found himself alone in the penthouse. He wandered around the apartment, admiring the views of the city. He was standing by the window, looking out at the skyline when Eleanor entered the room. "I know this isn't easy for you," she said, her voice softer than usual. "But you're doing the right thing." Mark turned to face her, his expression conflicted. "Am I?" he asked quietly. Eleanor met his gaze, her eyes steady. "You'll see," she said. "In time, you'll see that this was the right choice." Mark didn't know if he believed her, but as the days went by, he couldn't help but feel that there was more to Eleanor than he had originally thought. There was something about her, something that made him want to know her better. Maybe, just maybe, this business arrangement would turn into something more. Stay tuned for the next part. Will Mark and Eleanor's arrangement remain purely business, or will it evolve into something deeper? And what happens when feelings begin to get in the way of their carefully constructed plan? Don't miss the next chapter. Mark woke up the next morning feeling more conflicted than ever. The life he had agreed to live was starting to feel suffocating. Eleanor's world, with its cold luxury and calculated precision, was nothing like what he had imagined. He had signed a contract, but somehow, it felt like more than that. It felt like a trap. He had come to know Eleanor as the woman who offered him everything he could ever need: financial security, a roof over his head, a way out of his crushing debts. But the more time he spent with her, the more he realized that there was something deeper at play, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. That morning, Eleanor had scheduled another public appearance, a gala event for one of her charity foundations. Mark had expected to spend the evening in the background, a silent partner in this marriage of convenience. But as they entered the grand ballroom together, something shifted. The guests at the event treated Eleanor like royalty, and Mark couldn't help but feel like a fish out of water. He stood beside her, wearing a tuxedo that felt too tight, his nerves flaring up with every passing second. Eleanor, on the other hand, exuded confidence as she effortlessly mingled with the elite. She didn't seem fazed at all by the spotlight. As the night went on, Mark felt like an outsider in this world of privilege and power. Every time he tried to speak to someone, they would either brush him off or direct their attention back to Eleanor. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was just a prop, a part of the image Eleanor was creating. But then, Eleanor's voice broke through his thoughts. "Mark, come here," she said, her tone almost gentle. She gestured for him to join her at a table where a few prominent business leaders were seated. Mark hesitated for a moment, but then reluctantly made his way over to her. As he approached the table, Eleanor introduced him to the group with a casual but firm gesture. "This is my husband, Mark," she said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "We've been married for a few weeks now." Mark forced a smile, trying to appear confident, but inside, he felt like a complete fraud. It wasn't until he caught the gaze of one of the businessmen at the table that he realized something. The man was eyeing him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. He suddenly felt like he was on display, like every part of his life was being examined under a microscope. As the conversation continued, Mark found himself lost in his thoughts again. Eleanor seemed to be in control of everything. She made small talk with ease, her voice smooth and composed. But Mark couldn't help but wonder if this was all for show. Did Eleanor really need him for more than just the contract? He hadn't figured it out yet, but there was something in her demeanor, something in the way she had looked at him earlier that night, that made him think she was more than just a businesswoman. She was a woman with her own vulnerabilities, her own complexities. And for the first time, Mark wasn't sure whether he was just a pawn in her game or if there was something more between them. Later that evening, after the event had ended, Mark and Eleanor returned to the penthouse. The atmosphere in the apartment was different from what it had been before. It wasn't just about business anymore. There was a shift, a tension between them that neither of them could ignore. Eleanor was sitting on the couch, her gaze fixed on the city lights outside the window. Mark hesitated before joining her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, breaking the silence. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a deep breath, her shoulders tense. "I'm fine," she replied, but there was something in her voice that Mark couldn't quite decipher. He sat beside her, unsure of what to say next. After a long pause, Eleanor finally spoke. "You know, I never wanted this life. I never asked for any of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean?" he asked. Eleanor looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting nervously. "I built all of this, Mark. This empire, this image. But sometimes, I wonder if it's all worth it." Mark's heart skipped a beat. For the first time, he saw a crack in her armor, a glimpse of the woman beneath the powerful CEO. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice softer than usual. "We're in this together." Eleanor met his gaze, her expression softening for a moment. But just as quickly, the walls went back up. She stood up and walked to the other side of the room. "This is what we agreed on," she said, her tone distant again. "This is just business." Mark felt a pang of disappointment in his chest. For a moment, he thought there might be something real between them. But now, he wasn't so sure. Eleanor had her walls up higher than ever, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't seem to break through. Yet, in that moment, Mark realized something. This marriage, this arrangement, wasn't just about money or business. It was about two people who were trying to find something, whether it was security, love, or redemption, and both of them were too afraid to admit what they truly needed. As Mark lay awake that night, staring up at the ceiling, he knew that their story was just beginning. Stay tuned for the next part. Will Mark finally break through Eleanor's walls, or will their marriage remain nothing more than a contract? And what happens when the line between business and love begins to blur? You won't want to miss what comes next. Mark woke up the next morning with a heavy feeling in his chest. It had been days since the gala, but the tension between him and Eleanor still lingered. He had tried to reach out to her, tried to make sense of the strange distance between them, but she was as cold and distant as ever. The contract they had signed was still in place, and it seemed like that was all it would ever be, just a piece of paper, a business deal that neither of them could escape from. Yet, in the quiet of the night, Mark couldn't help but wonder if there was something more that neither of them was ready to acknowledge. The days passed quickly, with Eleanor keeping him busy with various events and appearances. But it was clear that their marriage, while convenient, was still lacking the warmth or connection that he had secretly hoped for. Eleanor was always professional, always composed, but the spark between them that had briefly flickered during their initial meetings was gone. Mark spent his days in the penthouse, trying to find his place in a world that didn't feel like his own. He was still the man who had signed a contract for the future, but deep down, he knew he was struggling to accept this new life. It wasn't until one rainy evening, when Mark came home after another long day of meetings, that something unexpected happened. Eleanor was waiting for him in the living room, sitting by the large windows that overlooked the city. The atmosphere in the room felt different, less rigid, more personal. When she saw him, she stood up and walked toward him, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. "We need to talk," she said, her voice quieter than usual. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He had been waiting for this moment, for Eleanor to open up, to finally let him in. But as she spoke, he realized that she wasn't going to make it easy for him. "I've been thinking a lot about this arrangement," she began, her tone measured but sincere. "And I think it's time we address some things." Mark's pulse quickened as he listened, unsure of where this conversation would lead. He had been expecting business talk, more formalities, but this was different. Eleanor paused, her eyes locking with his. "I know this is complicated," she continued. "I never wanted this life, Mark. I never planned for things to be like this. But now that you're here, I've started to wonder if maybe we can find something more between us. Maybe, this marriage could be more than just a contract." Mark's breath caught in his throat. For the first time, she was admitting it. The walls she had built so high were starting to crumble, and in that moment, he realized he was afraid to let himself believe it. But there was something raw in her eyes, something real, and for the first time since their deal began, Mark thought maybe this was a chance for them both to be more than just strangers bound by a contract. For a moment, they stood there, neither of them knowing what to say next. Eleanor was the first to break the silence, taking a deep breath. I don't expect anything from you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But maybe, we can try to make this work. For both of us. Mark felt a weight lifting off his shoulders, but at the same time, he couldn't shake the uncertainty that still lingered between them. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that there was something real forming between them, but the fear of being let down held him back. Mark reached out and gently took her hand, looking into her eyes. I don't know if I'm ready to trust this yet, Eleanor, he admitted. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to give this a chance if you are. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, and then, for the first time since they had met, she smiled a soft, genuine smile that made Mark's heart flutter. We'll take it one day at a time, she said. That night, as they sat together in silence, the city lights flickering outside the window, Mark couldn't help but feel like this was the beginning of something new. Maybe they weren't just playing roles anymore. Maybe, just maybe, they could become something real. But deep down, he knew it would take time, and he wasn't sure if they had enough of it. Stay tuned for the next part of this journey. Will Eleanor and Mark's tentative steps toward real connection lead to something lasting, or will their fears pull them apart? You won't want to miss the next chapter in their story. The next few days felt like a whirlwind for Mark. Eleanor had become more distant again, as if their brief moment of vulnerability had never happened. She was back to being the composed, business-minded woman he had first met, the one who seemed to have it all under control. They continued to attend events together, make public appearances, and play the part of a married couple, but the tension between them was palpable. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor was still hiding something from him, and he wasn't sure if it was just a fear of getting hurt or if there was more to the distance between them. He found himself questioning everything: their arrangement, her intentions, and whether this was ever going to be more than a contract. One afternoon, Mark found himself sitting in the penthouse, staring out at the city skyline. He had a growing sense of uncertainty. The more he got to know Eleanor, the more complex she seemed. She was a woman of power, yet there were times when he saw cracks in her armor, moments of vulnerability that she quickly masked. He knew she had been through a lot, but she rarely spoke about it. There were parts of her past that she kept hidden, and Mark couldn't help but wonder if they were the reason she was so guarded. He had to admit, he was becoming more invested in their marriage, even if he wasn't sure whether Eleanor felt the same way. That evening, Eleanor had invited him to a private dinner at the penthouse. It was supposed to be a casual meal, just the two of them, but Mark felt the weight of the evening bearing down on him. They hadn't spent much time alone recently, and he couldn't help but feel nervous. He had been avoiding the subject of their marriage, unsure of how to approach it. But tonight, he decided he couldn't keep pretending. He had to know if there was a chance for something real between them, or if they were both just going through the motions. As he walked into the dining room, Eleanor was already sitting at the table, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She looked stunning as always, but there was a coldness to her demeanor that made him hesitate. He took a seat across from her, trying to shake off the tension in his chest. Eleanor broke the silence first, her voice smooth but with a hint of something deeper. You know, Mark, I've been thinking about our arrangement. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Was she going to bring it up? Was she finally ready to have an honest conversation? He nodded, trying to remain calm. I've been wondering if maybe we've been going about this all wrong, Eleanor continued, her eyes fixed on him. I never wanted a traditional marriage, but I also didn't think it would be like this. We've been so focused on keeping up appearances, but maybe it's time we look at what's really going on between us. Mark's pulse quickened as he listened. Was she opening up to him? Was she finally willing to let their relationship move beyond the boundaries of a business contract? Mark leaned forward, his voice steady. I agree, he said. I think we've been avoiding the truth for too long. I know this isn't what either of us expected, but maybe we can make it work. Maybe we can actually get to know each other. And maybe we can find something real in all of this. Eleanor's expression softened for a moment, and Mark saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a brief moment of hope. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The quiet stretched between them, but it wasn't as uncomfortable as before. It felt like they were both waiting for something, unsure of what would come next. Then, Eleanor reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The gesture was simple but meaningful, and Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth spreading through him. "You know," Eleanor said softly, her voice almost a whisper, "I never thought I would find someone like you. Someone who would challenge me, make me question everything I thought I knew. But here we are." Mark looked at her, his heart beating faster. Could this be the start of something more? Was she finally opening up to the possibility of love, or was this just another fleeting moment of vulnerability? As they sat together in the soft glow of the dimmed lights, Mark realized that their journey was far from over. They still had so much to figure out, so much to understand about each other. But for the first time, he felt like they were on the same page. Maybe their marriage wasn't just a contract. Maybe it could become something deeper, something that neither of them had expected. Stay tuned for the next part. Will Eleanor and Mark finally break down the walls between them and create something real, or will the weight of their pasts continue to hold them back? Find out what happens next in their unpredictable journey. The days following that evening felt like a turning point for Mark and Eleanor. They had finally opened up to each other, allowing for a new layer of honesty to unfold between them. Eleanor seemed different, less guarded, and for the first time, Mark could see glimpses of the person she had been hiding. Yet, despite this new sense of connection, there was still a wall between them that neither knew how to bring down completely. Eleanor's reluctance to fully embrace the idea of a real relationship still lingered, and Mark wasn't sure if it was out of fear or something else. One morning, Eleanor had asked Mark to meet her at her office. It wasn't uncommon for them to have these brief, businesslike meetings, but this one felt different. Mark was nervous as he walked into the sleek, modern office building where Eleanor ran her empire. He had come to realize that while he had signed up for a marriage of convenience, he was now wanting something more. What he wasn't sure of was whether Eleanor felt the same way, or if she was just playing the role she had always played, the woman in control. When he entered her office, she was standing by the window, looking out over the city's skyline. The sight of her back turned to him, so composed and elegant, made Mark's stomach tighten. He had seen her in many different settings, but there was something about the way she stood there, so isolated, that struck him deeply. He could feel the weight of everything unsaid between them. As he approached her, Eleanor turned and smiled faintly. "Mark, thank you for coming," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about the other night." Mark nodded, his heart beating faster. "What have you decided?" he asked, unsure if he was ready for the answer. There was a pause as Eleanor walked over to her desk and sat down, her posture still perfect, but her expression a little softer. She motioned for Mark to take a seat across from her. "I've realized something," she began, her voice carrying a sense of vulnerability that Mark wasn't used to hearing from her. "I've been running from the idea of real connection for so long, but maybe I'm ready to try. With you." Mark's heart skipped a beat. This was the first time she had said anything that even remotely resembled a genuine admission of feeling. His mind raced, unsure of what to say or how to respond. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the air was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if both of them were trying to figure out if what they were saying could really be true. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "I don't know what this means for us, Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "But I want to try too. I want to give this a real chance, not just for the sake of the contract, but for us. I don't want to be just your husband in name. I want to be with you." Eleanor's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, she seemed to let her guard down just enough for Mark to see the person she really was underneath all the power and control. She stood up from the desk and walked toward him, her gaze steady. "I don't know if I'm ready for everything that comes with being with someone," she admitted. "But I want to try. I want to see if we can find something real. Something that goes beyond the contract we signed." Mark stood up as well, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He had no idea where this journey would lead, but for the first time, he felt like they were both moving in the same direction. Their eyes locked, and without another word, they both knew what the next step was. Eleanor reached out, taking his hand in hers, her grip warm but strong. Mark could feel the shift in the air between them, the distance that had always existed slowly fading away. Maybe, just maybe, this could turn into something more than either of them expected. The following days were a mix of hope and uncertainty. They spent more time together, not just for business, but in quiet moments that allowed them to talk, to laugh, and to begin building something that felt real. Mark could see the change in Eleanor. She was still powerful, still confident, but there was something different about her now. She wasn't just the businesswoman who had brought him into her life. She was someone he could connect with, someone who was beginning to trust him. But even with this progress, Mark knew that there were still many obstacles ahead. They had come a long way, but they were still learning about each other, still uncovering layers that neither of them had expected. As Mark lay in bed that night, reflecting on everything that had happened, he realized that their story was far from over. They were both on the brink of something new, something they had never expected when they first signed that contract. But for the first time, Mark was excited for what the future might hold. He had no idea where this journey would take them, but he knew one thing for certain: they were in it together now. Stay tuned for the next part of this journey. Will Eleanor and Mark's tentative steps toward a real relationship survive the pressures of their pasts and the world around them? Or will the contract they signed ultimately hold them back from something more? Don't miss the next chapter in their evolving story. As the days went by, Mark and Eleanor's new dynamic started to feel more comfortable. They spent time together outside of work, slowly letting down the walls they had both built around themselves. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, something neither of them had anticipated when they first agreed to this marriage of convenience. Eleanor, usually so guarded, began sharing pieces of herself with Mark. The more she opened up, the more Mark realized how much she had hidden, how much she had built to protect herself from the world. She had never truly let anyone in, not even the people closest to her. But with him, there was something different. She was starting to trust him, and that made all the difference. One evening, after a quiet dinner at the penthouse, Eleanor sat by the window looking out at the city. Mark joined her, feeling the pull of the moment. It had become one of their routines, sitting together in silence, watching the lights flicker across the skyline. There was something soothing about it, something that made him feel closer to her, even when they didn't speak. As he sat beside her, he couldn't help but wonder where they were headed. He had started to fall for her, but he wasn't sure if she felt the same way. He knew she cared, but was it love? Could it be? Mark, Eleanor's voice broke the silence, soft and thoughtful. I've been thinking about everything we've been through, and I want to thank you for being patient with me. I've never had anyone be patient with me before. Mark looked at her, surprised. She rarely showed this kind of vulnerability. Eleanor was always in control, always so composed. But tonight, she seemed different. You don't have to thank me, Mark said, his voice gentle. I just want to be here for you, Eleanor. I know this hasn't been easy for you. She turned to face him, her eyes softer than usual. It hasn't been easy for either of us, she admitted. But I think we've come a long way, don't you? I never thought I'd say this, but I feel like I'm actually starting to trust you. And that's something I've never really done before. Mark's heart swelled at her words. He had always known that she had walls up, but hearing her say that she trusted him was a breakthrough, something that felt almost too good to be true. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it lightly. I trust you too, Eleanor, he said. And I want us to keep going, to see where this takes us. Her eyes searched his face for a moment, as if trying to gauge the truth behind his words. For the first time since their marriage began, it felt like they were both on the same page. The business arrangement they had entered into was slowly evolving into something far more complex, and both of them were beginning to see the potential for a deeper connection. But there was still uncertainty. Eleanor had her doubts, and Mark wasn't sure if he was ready to fully commit his heart to someone who had always kept hers so carefully guarded. The next day, Eleanor had a meeting with her business partners. Mark had come to understand how important these meetings were for her, how much she had invested in her career and the legacy she was building. But that day, something unexpected happened. As they walked into the conference room, Eleanor's usual confidence faltered for a split second. She had always been the one in control, but in that moment, Mark saw a different side of Hera's side that was vulnerable, uncertain. She glanced at him, almost as if looking for reassurance, and without thinking, Mark placed his hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. The touch was simple, but it spoke volumes. Eleanor's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, she seemed to let her guard down, allowing herself to feel something other than the weight of responsibility she carried so heavily. Mark could see the tension leave her body, just a little, as she straightened up and turned to face the meeting. It was as if that small gesture had given her the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the meeting went on, Mark sat quietly in the back, watching Eleanor in her element. She was sharp, decisive, and commanding. But every now and then, he caught glimpses of the woman he had come to know in private, someone who was capable of vulnerability, someone who could let her guard down with him. And in that moment, Mark realized something. Maybe this was the beginning of something truly real between them. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was real. Stay tuned for the next part. Will Mark and Eleanor finally allow their growing connection to bloom into something more, or will their fears and insecurities continue to hold them back? And what happens when they are faced with a choice that could change everything? Find out in the next chapter of their unpredictable journey. As the days passed, Mark and Eleanor's relationship continued to evolve in ways neither of them had expected. It was no longer just a contract or a business arrangement. Something real was growing between them, and it both thrilled and terrified Mark. Eleanor, usually so composed, was showing a side of herself that Mark had never seen before. She was opening up, slowly but surely, and it was clear that the walls she had built around herself were beginning to crack. But Mark knew that there was still so much left unsaid, so many things they both needed to figure out. Could they truly make this work, or would their pasts pull them apart? One evening, after another long day of meetings and events, Eleanor invited Mark to join her for dinner at the penthouse. It was a rare moment of quiet between them, and as he entered the living room, he noticed that the atmosphere felt different, calm, but with an underlying tension. Eleanor was sitting by the fireplace, her gaze distant, as if she were lost in thought. Mark hesitated for a moment before walking over and sitting down beside her. The crackling of the fire was the only sound in the room, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Eleanor turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Mark," she began, her voice low, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking about what you said. About giving this a real chance." Mark looked at her, his heart racing. This was the moment he had been waiting for, but part of him was afraid of what it meant. He had come to care deeply for Eleanor, but could she really let go of her past and open herself up to love? She continued, her voice soft but steady. "I'm not good at this," she admitted. "I've never been good at letting someone in. But I think I'm ready to try. With you." Mark's breath caught in his throat. He had never heard her speak so openly before, and for a moment, he wasn't sure what to say. Could he believe her? Could they truly make this work, even after everything that had happened? Mark reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "Eleanor," he said, his voice full of emotion. "I want to try too. I don't want this to be just a contract anymore. I want us to be more than that." For a moment, there was silence between them, but it wasn't awkward. It felt like they were both taking a deep breath, stepping into the unknown together. Eleanor looked down at their intertwined hands, her expression softening. "I don't know what the future holds," she said quietly. "But I want to find out with you. I've spent so long building this life, but maybe there's more to it than just work and money. Maybe I can have something real." Mark nodded, his heart swelling with hope. For the first time, it felt like they were on the same page. They both had fears, they both had doubts, but they were finally ready to face them together. That night, as they sat together by the fire, something shifted. It wasn't a grand gesture, and it wasn't the perfect moment. But it was real. Mark knew that they still had a long way to go, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't afraid of what the future held. They had a chance, and that was enough for him. Stay tuned for the next part. Will Mark and Eleanor's growing connection be enough to overcome their fears and insecurities? Or will their pasts continue to stand in the way of something real? You won't want to miss what happens next in their journey. The days after that quiet evening by the fire seemed to stretch out in a way that made everything feel new. Eleanor and Mark's relationship was no longer just a business arrangement. It had evolved into something deeper, something neither of them had anticipated. They spent more time together, not just at events, but in the quiet moments where they could finally really talk about their hopes, their fears, and what they both wanted from life. The walls between them had come down, and in its place was something raw and real. They still had their doubts, but they were no longer facing them alone. One afternoon, as they sat together in the penthouse, Mark looked at Eleanor, who was once again gazing out at the city. He had grown so accustomed to these moments with her, these small, quiet pauses between them where nothing needed to be said, yet everything was understood. But today was different. Today, he had a question for her, one that had been building inside of him for weeks. "Eleanor," he began, his voice tentative. "I've been thinking about this, about us. And I know we've been taking things slow, but I need to know if we're both on the same page. What do you want from this, from me? I want more than just a marriage of convenience. I want a life with you." His words hung in the air, but they didn't feel heavy. They felt like the truth finally being spoken out loud. Eleanor turned to him, her eyes softening, but there was a trace of uncertainty there. She had never been one to share her emotions openly, but for the first time, she seemed ready to open up. "Mark," she said quietly, "I spent so many years building walls around myself, thinking I needed to protect everything I've worked for. But the truth is, I've never had anyone like you in my life. And that scares me." She paused, taking a breath. "I never imagined I'd find someone I could really trust. But with you, I'm starting to believe that it's possible." Her voice wavered slightly, but she didn't look away. Mark's heart swelled at her words. He had never thought he would hear her speak like this, not in a million years. Eleanor was a woman of control, a woman who had built an empire, but in that moment, she was just like him, vulnerable and searching for something real. "I don't have all the answers," Eleanor continued, her voice steadying. "But I know that I want to try, Mark. I want to try with you. I've spent my life afraid of what it would mean to open up, to let someone in. But with you, I don't feel so afraid anymore." She reached out and took his hand in hers, the gesture simple but profound. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want to face it with you. Not just as your wife, but as someone who loves you, someone who cares about you more than I ever thought I could care about anyone." Mark squeezed her hand, his heart racing. In that moment, Mark realized that everything they had been through, the doubts, the fears, the uncertainties, had led them to this point. They had found each other in the most unexpected of circumstances, but now, they were no longer just two people bound by a contract. They were partners, equal in their vulnerability and their desire to build something real. They had faced the truth of their feelings, and now they were ready to move forward, not as strangers, not as business partners, but as something more. With a soft smile, Mark leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was filled with everything they had shared and everything they were about to discover together. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. It was real. As they pulled away, Mark looked into Eleanor's eyes, and for the first time, he saw not just a woman of power and strength, but a woman who had let go of her fears and opened her heart. And in that moment, he knew that this was just the beginning of their journey together. Stay tuned for more. What will the future hold for Mark and Eleanor? Will their love continue to grow, or will new challenges arise to test them? Don't miss the next chapter in their evolving story.